Well, welcome back, Mike, to XO News TV.
Thank you again, Michael.
Now we're going to start with the US Marine Corps Reserve. When you completed your interview or recruitment into the space program, you then were asked to go and join the rest of the recruits
Yes.
and complete boot camp. So why don't you tell us about what happened and that anomalous incident concerning some kind of the chip?
Okay. Again, all the memories related to my recruitment. Ultimately, after speaking with that captain 2 times about, my test scores and, Michael, I'll make sure I send this telegram to your family. I went on and joined my platoon. Oddly enough, I was made the platoon guide of my platoon, which means I was the leader of my platoon. I believe we had 80 recruits in my platoon, and I was overall responsible for them. I went on with my boot camp experience, but it's important to point out all the while I had the memories of that recruitment and the strangeness of that, kind of like being suckwards back in a pipe, waking up in that chair. All those things were with me. The signing of all the paperwork and all that, those memories never went away. And I pondered on that a lot for the first few days, and eventually you get so busy in boot camp that you just, I stopped thinking about that and got into what I was doing, and it didn't trouble me that much while I was in boot camp. But one important thing to point out, it was a couple days after the recruitment. I was probably in my 4th or 5th day of boot camp. I noticed that I had a small blood spot on my right leg here in my calf. And I could feel that there was something hard inside of there. And, boot camp is an environment where you don't want to draw attention to yourself. You don't, they ask you every night. It was a ritual. They would come through the barracks and have you report any personal or physical problems you may have. And I never brought it up because I figured, well, it's just some little sore that'll eventually go away. But there was a distinct hard object in my leg and a little wound on my leg where, on top of that. Well, as the weeks went by and I got, I'm making it through boot camp, probably about 2/3 of the way through, 3/4 of the way through, I kept noticing as I went through the boot camp experience that this wound on my leg, it started festering, and the sore was getting bigger and bigger. And it was as if my body was rejecting something, like there was something in there that shouldn't have been in there. Well, I got some free time one evening and was able to go to the bathroom or the head and inspect my leg, and had enough time that I sat there and looked at it and worked with it, and I started working that object out of my leg. And it took about 20 minutes to get it to come out. And when I finally got it out, what I was holding in my hand was a small BB-like sphere, but it was made out of what appeared to me to be like stone, almost. It looked like a small, perfectly round rock. And it had holes in it, all around it, evenly spaced, as well as having holes that had these little spike-like things on it. But when I pulled it out of my leg, it was almost like this clear mucousy type substance, kind of like what you'd see on a jellyfish or something like that. It's really hard to describe. But when I pulled that sphere out of my leg, this clear tendril-y material came out behind it, and it kind of snapped out of my leg. Well, I got that out of there, and it literally left a fairly good sized hole in my leg for some time. It took a while for that to heal up and for that to close.
Can you just point to that spot on your leg? So
I can. I hope it'll show up here. If I'm in the sun just right, it's very visible. There it is right there.
I see.
And if you put your finger on it, you can feel kind of a divot in there if you were to touch it. When I pulled it out of my leg, Michael, I looked at it for a while and I thought, what is this thing? Where did that come from? I had detected it early on in boot camp, so there was no chance that it was a piece of shrapnel or something from the grenade range or anything like that. I knew it was there from that moment on. And I decided to throw it in the toilet and flush it and go on about my business. I didn't understand what it could have been. I didn't want to bring any undue attention to myself. So I got rid of it and went on, and graduated from boot camp.
So this implant you found, or this device, was immediately after you've come back from
Yes.
what, at the time, what you now believe to be a 20 and back program.
Yes.
So that device was probably some kind of monitoring device.
That is what I believe to this, at this time. That it was purposely put in there. It was some sort of monitoring or tracking device that was going to be used to track me or monitor me.
Right. You mentioned that then you were put into a position of authority with the other recruits, that you were leader or playing that role with a group of 80 others from your platoon. Was that a surprise to you?
It was. Not that I don't have confidence in myself, but I noticed very quickly that I seemed to have this unusually advanced ability to lead people. That I knew how to handle people. I knew how to coordinate and get things done and manage the platoon in an effective way. And I would have never thought, that I would have had that skill set as an 18-year-old kid just arriving in boot camp. It seemed to come very natural to me, almost like I had an advanced sense of that. And I don't know if that's why they picked me for that position, but they ultimately did.
Mm-hmm. If you have served 20 years in a covert program and had your memories wiped, even though you remember the bit leading up to you actually going off to begin that 20-year and back service, within your subconscious there would be certain memories or skill sets that some people recognize or could even be activated.
Yes. Yeah, I believe that. I believe that I had gone and achieved some life experience and some experiences that were hidden in there. And, my subconscious was able to bring that out, and I was able to bring those to bear to lead that platoon in boot camp.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that subconscious skill set could have been kind of activated, through some kind of keywords, some code words, so that if for whatever reason you were needed for some covert assignment, that you could be activated?
I don't know. I don't know what to say about that. I think that's a great possibility, but it's not something that I'm confident in. Mm-hmm. I don't want to describe something that I'm just not aware of.
Okay. Well, let's explore that a little bit later. But now, after you've completed boot camp, now you're a U.S. Marine Corps Reserve, and then in '79 you are accepted into officer candidate school. And you do very well. So why don't you tell us about that?
Well, actually, it wasn't '79. I enrolled in that. In '79, I went to training at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina for my MOS. It was late '81, early '82. I believe it was late '81. Now, you'll recall when I first started describing my encounter with the initial Marine recruiter when I was still in high school, they described this Reserve Special Enlistment Program as an avenue through which you could become an officer in the Marine Corps. Well, I had come back home. I was attending college and going to my monthly drill meetings at my unit in Kansas City. And I had kind of forgotten about the whole idea of enrolling in the officer program. I don't know. I subconsciously, I don't know that I was really all that interested in that, and I sort of ignored it. Well, eventually a captain in my reserve unit called me into his office and reminded me that I had in fact, signed up for the opportunity to be a Marine officer, and he wanted me to encourage me to go ahead and put in the applications and enroll. And he put me in contact with the officer candidate recruiter for that region, and that began my process. So in the summer of 1982, I went to the first increment of the Marine Corps platoon leaders class, which meant that I would have to do, that was 6 weeks long. I would at a later time, a year or two away from then, I would go through the second 6-week increment. But I went and attended. I was voted by my peers as #1 in the class, peer reviewed, and I did quite well. I had a good time there. It was a very good experience.
I think that's one of the certificates that you have.
Yes, yes.
So eventually you end your service with the Marine Corps Reserve, and that your period of obligation extended up to 1984.
Right.
But your records, your DD 286 military service records, shows that you were still with the U.S. Marine Corps Reserve until 1987.
Yes.
Which is 3 years more than your 6-year obligation period. So what do you think was happening there?
Well, as I look back on that, that document clearly states that from March of 1983 until December of 87, I was still on the rolls as a member of the United States Marine Corps Reserve as a corporal. Now, when I got out of, I think it's important to point out that although I completed the first increment of Marine Corps OCS, things in my life weren't working out. You know, after I got home from that, my marriage began to struggle. I wasn't doing so well in school. Things weren't working out, and I withdrew from that program. Well, when I withdrew, of course the Marine Corps wasn't happy about that. The recruiters that had initially brought me into the officer program, they came to visit me a few times, made every attempt to get me to change my mind. And, you know, I felt strongly that my obligation was to my marriage, and that's, you know, that was the path that I took. I hated to pull out of that program, but I felt like I had to do the right thing by my marriage. It's also important to point out I eventually got divorced anyway, but I made that attempt. Now, when I pulled out of that reserve, the Marine Corps officer program, I still had a year left on my initial reserve obligation, which was 6 years long. This would have been early '83 that I withdrew from that officer candidates program. Knowing that I had an obligation left, I put my uniform back on and I went back to the unit and to begin attending my drill meetings again. Well, when I showed up on that Saturday when I went back to the unit, and it had been some time, well, you know, a year and a half had gone by and I had been gone from the unit, because they take you off of off of active reserve status when you go into this officer program, and they put you on inactive reserve status, which means that I didn't have to attend the drill meetings anymore. Well, I knew I had a year left and that I needed to go back and fulfill my obligation. So I showed up at the unit. The very same captain that had encouraged me to go ahead and enroll in the officer program met me just immediately. I had only been there for minutes, and he appeared in the hallway. Hey, what are you doing here? You know, what's going on? And I explained to him that I had withdrawn from the program and that I knew that I had a year left and I was here to fulfill my obligation. And he said, don't worry about that. Go on home. You've done enough. And I wasn't arguing with him, but I reminded him, sir, I've got a year left on this obligation. And he, don't worry about it. You've done enough. Go on home. I asked, will I get a discharge? And he said, oh, something will catch up with you eventually. Something will come to you in the mail. I was confused by it, but I did what he said, and I went home, and I never went back to the reserve unit, believing that I was somehow discharged. Well, I worked in the private sector. From that time on, I worked in a wheel manufacturing facility for automotive wheels. And there came a point where I wasn't satisfied with civilian life anymore, and I wanted to go back in the military. Well, I made the decision to go in the Army, hoping to get into one of the Ranger battalions. So I went through the process with the Army, went and took all the tests, signed the papers to join. And the Army recruiter told me that it would be a very routine matter that he would, because of my prior service, that he would ask for the Marine Corps to transfer my records to the Army, my DD Form 214, which is what they needed to prove my prior service, so I could carry my rank and time and grade over to the Army. About a week, a little over a week went by, and this recruiter called me and told me, I need you to come speak with me. I'm having some trouble, and I wanted to talk to you about it. So I went to his office and met with him, and he explained to me that what is typically a very routine inter-branch transfer of records, it was being very difficult. That the Marine Corps had told him, initially, we don't have any record of this Marine. And they contacted them again, and the story changed a little bit. Well, the records, they're unavailable, and then they tried a third time, and then the story was, well, his records had been destroyed in a fire or something like that. And it was very important to me to get a DD Form 214 from the Marine Corps, because without that, I would have to start in the Army as a private E1 and build my rank back up. If I had the proof of my service from the Marine Corps, they would be able to give me some of my rank back and higher pay, and it was very important to me. So this recruiter pointed out to me that my Congressman Ike Skelton at the time, that was District 4 in Missouri, he was the congressman for District 4. He pointed out to me that he had an office very close by to the recruiting station. In fact, you could see it out of the window of their office. And he suggested that I go there and just put a request in through Congressman Skelton to see if he could help me get these records. Of course, I didn't speak with the congressman. There was a nice lady that worked there in his Seattle, Missouri office. I went in and described to her the difficulty that I was having. And it's really critical to point out here, Michael, at no time did I go in there saying, hey, I'm upset about the government, I'm upset at the military, there are all these problems. It was nothing like that. I made a simple, courteous request to see if she could get the congressman to help me. She took my information, and I thanked her, and went about my business. A couple days, maybe 4 days went by, and I got a large envelope in the mail. And it had a stack of papers in there that included a letter from the congressman, a certificate of honorable discharge from the Marine Corps that was dated with my proper discharge date of March 13th, 1984. But it also had 2 DD Form 214s together in this stack of paperwork. And both of them stated that this is not a final discharge. Very suspicious. It made very little sense that they were providing me. It was conflicting. The DD Form 214s that they gave me listed me as a E3 Lance Corporal, while the certificate of discharge listed me as a Corporal E4. Well, I took that information to the Army recruiter, thinking, okay, I've got what I need. I really didn't pay attention to what was on the DD Form 214s. I thought, oh, eureka, I have the documents I need. I took them in. The Army recruiter immediately laughed at me when I handed him that paperwork. He went, Michael, you have DD Form 214s here. You have a discharge that says it's not a final discharge. What is this? This makes no sense. At 27 years old, my main concern was getting back in the military. I really didn't read much into it. I didn't know what to say to him, and he told me that he wouldn't be able to make a decision on if they could use these documents or not for my entry into the Army. He let me know that he would have to send that up the chain to Army headquarters to find out if they would allow it. Another week or so went by, and he contacted me, and I remember him saying, I don't know how they're doing it, I don't know how they're buying off on this, but they're going to let you come into the Army with the rank of E3, because that was what was on the DD Form 214.
So in terms of your military service then, we have different periods from 1978 to 1984, March of 84. That was the period where you were obliged to serve with the US Marine Corps Reserve. And then from December 1987, when you enlisted and began service with the Army Rangers, your work with the Army began. But in between that, officially you were you didn't have any status with the military at all, but yet the DD 286 service record that you later got showed that you were still listed as a reserve. So what is the possibility that this was a period, even though maybe you do recall, during that 3 years from 84 to 87 when you weren't with the military and you were in civilian life, were you in any way possibly called into covert operations? Is there anything that makes you suspect that happened, or was this entry in your military record from 84 to 87 merely a clerical error?
I think one person would look at it and say, well, this is just that, a clerical error. This is just a paperwork mistake. Michael, I can't say during those 3 years that I have any memories of being in service to the military. My impression was, and my belief was, when that captain at my reserve unit said, go home, you're done, my belief was that I was done in the United States Marine Corps and that I had been discharged, even though I didn't have a DD Form 214 in my possession. Receiving the strange DD Form 214 so I could get into the Army, that made me think, oh, this is strange and weird. But it wasn't until I saw that Department of Defense Form 2586, which is basically a transcript of all of your military experience. It wasn't until I saw that for the first time in 1996. And when I saw the section on there where it says that I was being carried on the Marine Corps rolls as a member of the Marine Corps in some way, on some level.
When we come back, we'll take up then with some experiments or something that happened with the Army Rangers, which may be a part of the Secret Space Program service, or at least some covert operations that were relevant to that. So thank you again for being interviewed, and we look forward to talking to you soon.